Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us here this morning. We still have some people coming in, so we're just going to take a moment before we get started. Okay, well, it's 3:10, so I think we can get started. Good morning to you all. Thank you for joining us today for this CEMBUREAU event. It's an EU Green Week event, and today we're going to be discussing an important topic: how to establish lead markets for low-carbon circular cement products that will support Europe's transition to a sustainable and competitive economy. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the CEMBUREAU Net Zero Roadmap. This document was published in 2020. It was, in fact, one of the first roadmaps to be published after the publication of the Green Deal. And it sets out the decarbonisation ambitions of the sector across the cement value chain. So we basically tackle what we call the 5 Cs, which is clinker, cement, concrete, construction, and carbonation. Now, I don't need to tell you that cement is more than a building material. It's an essential and a strategic material for Europe, and its decarbonisation is an essential part of the EU's climate and industrial strategy. Now, the Clean Industrial Deal rightly prioritised lead markets, and through CEMBUREAU's Net Zero Roadmap, we recognise that targeted policy frameworks are key to transforming ambition into deployment. Now, our ambition is as follows. By 2030, the roadmap projects a 37% reduction in CO2 emissions related to cement production and 50% down the value chain. By 2040, a 78% reduction on cement and 93% down the value chain. And by 2050, the roadmap projects carbon neutral cement production in Europe, and indeed looks beyond that to the potential of becoming carbon negative. Now, to meet this ambition, we do highlight 4 key policy areas that we need to have in place. First and foremost, we need a watertight implementation of the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM. We must have a level playing field with operators in third countries, and circumvention rules must be tightened. Now, on top of that, we need access. We need access to funding for decarbonisation. We need access to affordable low-carbon electricity. We need access to waste and biomass and raw materials. And of course, we need access to infrastructure such as CO2 pipelines and storage. Now, beyond the upstream policy measures, the creation of lead markets is key to push the uptake of low-carbon circular products, as outlined, in fact, in our position paper of November of last year. Now, we welcome the Commission's decision in the Clean Industrial Deal to introduce voluntary carbon intensity label for cement under the Construction Products Regulation. This initiative, which includes a standardisation request, aims to enhance transparency and help stakeholders assess the environmental impact of cement products more effectively. Now, I think this discussion is very timely because the Commission will be making proposals on the upcoming Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act by the end of this year. So it's great to have you all here today to discuss this important topic. And we have, in fact, over 300 people registered for this event. So it's very encouraging to see the understanding that lead markets are important. So in short, I would say we're facing a challenge, which is not just environmental, it's economic. How do we balance regulatory ambition with industrial reality? How do we create a business environment where sustainable choices become market-driven decisions? So now I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Jean-Baptiste, who will be moderating the panel discussion on how to create lead markets for low-carbon circular products, notably cement. And then we'll have a presentation from our colleague from the German Cement Association on the VDZ's new CO2 label, which is named Cement Carbon Class, or CCC. So thank you. Jean-Baptiste, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kina, for introducing, for setting the scene for this discussion. My name is Jean-Baptiste Gomez. I'm working for CEMBUREAU as Senior Public Affairs Manager, and I'll be moderating the panel together with our panelists today. So I will introduce them to you. So first we've got Barbara Bondi-Suto, which is the Director of Construction Machinery and Market Surveillance at DG GROW at the European Commission. We've got Irene Dominguez, who is policy manager embodied carbon and lead markets at Bellona. Then we've got Stefano Piredes, chairperson of the subcommission on environmental affairs at the European Construction Industry Federation. And we've got finally Rob van der Meer, who's the industrial policy director at CEMBUREAU. Welcome to everybody, and thank you for accepting the invitation. To organize the discussion, the panel will be divided in two main questions. So we will take each question one by one, and each of the panelists will have time to provide the audience with her or his point of view. We'll start first with Ms. Bonvisuto, then with Rob, then with Irene, and then with Mr. Piredes. So if it's okay with you, I will try to clarify also one point. We would like you to send your questions via the Q&A tool that we've got here on Zoom. So please use this tool. That's the only tool available. And it would be nice if you could if you could address the question to the panelist or the speaker that you want to address the question to. We'll gather the question at the end of the session and try to have a Q&A session with you all after the presentation of our colleague from the German Cement Association. So let's start with the first question, everybody. So the question is as follows. How can the public procurement framework, but also private procurement, help creating lead markets for low carbon and circular products, notably cement, with the goal of eventually supporting the large-scale deployment of deep decarbonisation projects in the European cement sectors? Do you have examples of measures that can be taken at EU, national, and local level? Barbara, I give you the floor for the first question.
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Baptiste. Maybe just to start with the broad picture, I think already Cliona was referring to that. The idea from the Commission is that decarbonization should really be a business case. This is the idea which is behind the Clean Industrial Deal, business case for competitiveness and decarbonization. And you know that we have European companies, they are leaders in innovative and sustainable products, but there's a question of creating also the demand. And the idea of the Clean Industrial Deal, and then we will follow with the Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act, is to act at the same time on supply and demand. The Clean Industrial Deal looks at 6 main pillars: access to energy, Cliona already mentioned that, access to finance, investment, materials and circularity, lead markets, global markets, level playing field, and then skills. And it is indeed a combination of measures to support the supply of innovative and circular and sustainable products, and at the same time stimulate the demand. Now, in the context of stimulating demand, obviously public procurement plays a big role. Public procurement is 15% of GDP. And we are now first evaluating the current public procurement legal framework, and then you have already announced that we will revise that. And indeed, main objective of the revision would be to support innovation, to support circularity, to support green public procurement, to stimulate the demand, because we need to somehow fill the price gap between the innovative products and standard products. So this will for surely affect the construction sector. We are just at the start of this process. So we received, there was a public consultation ongoing on the evaluation. We received more than 2,000 replies, including from the construction sector. And then it would be very, very good for us to continue to have the feedback from your sector to understand how indeed we can use public procurement as a factor of stimulating a demand, at least public demand. There are also very good examples of good practices, for example, related to circularity in public procurement. We had put in place the big buyers working together platform, which has several work streams that focus precisely on the construction sector, including zero emissions construction sites. So on one hand, the revision of public procurement and stimulating indeed sustainable products through public demand. On the other hand, also supporting, giving a signal to the market, and that will be something which we can achieve through the standards, and cement is actually one of the first product which will enter the harmonized zone of the construction product regulation, and then through labeling. And that would provide a signal also to the private sector. So these are the areas where we are working on. Besides public procurement, in the context of the Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act, which we hope to adopt by the end of the year, we will also look at permitting procedure for industrial decarbonisation projects. So that if manufacturers invest on decarbonizing their industrial plants or setting up industrial plants with the aim of decarbonizing their production processes, and this may indeed also affect construction and also the production of cement, so that there would be incentives for that. There would be a possibility to access to finance, and then again, with the Industrial Decarbonisation Act, we will create and promote the lead markets, but that we will address in the second question, I understand. So I will just say that it's very, very timely, the discussion. Lead markets, it's really something on which we believe would be a driving force for decarbonization, and we need to discuss with the stakeholders community indeed how we can support them.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Really clear. We know the way forward. Then can I give the floor to my colleague Rob?
Thank you, Jean-Baptiste. And thank you, Barbara, for setting the floor on this discussion with some interesting perspectives. I think it's important to keep that a little bit in mind. One issue that I wanted to highlight is what you mentioned, the difference between the supply and the demand. And what we are really thinking about, the issue what we have here is how do we trigger the demand for low carbon products, and now for cement industry, of course, low carbon cement. But on the one hand, it is about low carbon cement, but low carbon cement, using low carbon cement doesn't necessarily mean that the end product, the built environment, the construction is also low carbon. And that is a challenging idea that we have to keep in mind, that just focusing on low carbon cement or even low carbon concrete or any low carbon product is not necessarily always beneficial for the topic that we want to highlight. I think that is important. And the second point that you highlighted is the price gap between the innovative products and the perhaps called traditional products. And that price gap is indeed a real challenge in the market, because a price gap leads to another demand. Now I come to my real answers, because this was reacting on you. We have been in the EU already on policies that focus on the low carbon cement and low carbon products. For instance, and then back to the point, I think that we have to focus on the building level. It is about the CPR, it's about the EPBD, which means that at the end, and soon, in fact, the global warming potential of cement has to be put on the labels of the cement bags and, of course, on the information that is available in the market. That's an important step. And that is an important step because it gives an indication about what the impact of a cement is. Back to the issue, only cement is not the topic, it is the built environment, but you need that values to start up. Second is you have to implement these legislation, but it also means, and that is back to your point of the demand, the public and private sector have to come into the market with questions on these products. And that is a challenge. And they will also, and that's back to what you said too, a second point, the price gap between these products. They also will have to accept, will have to work on the fact that there will be price differences on these products. And that is needed because otherwise the decarbonization of the cement industry will not have a business case. And that's the important step. Examples that we see as an action that can be taken by procurers or by public procurement is that they can look at the cement products being in the market and label them as being green or less green. In fact, already many cements are, compared to long time before, but also recently, quite green. But that should be triggered stronger with a voluntary labeling mechanism on country level. I think that's an important step for this discussion. We also could have a database of GWP data being assessed and available for products and making that available for the public. Anyhow, what my message is, as a CEMBUREAU's perspective, is there is legislation for the public procurement, and that's good. And the second point is it's now up to the member states to come with actions, to come with a labeling system or a system for public procurement. And finally, and that is something that we should never forget, most of the cement and the construction materials are sold to the private sector. Not only public sector has to act, but also the private sector should act. With that, I would like to stop, Jean-Baptiste.
Thank you so much, Rob. Also really clear. Irene, the floor is yours. Happy to hear what you have to tell us.
Thank you, Jean-Baptiste, and thank you, Ms. Mambisuto and Rob, for the great introduction. And I think you both made very compelling points, especially as to why we need lead markets. Indeed, we need this demand signal to start de-risking investment in low carbon solutions. I would perhaps like to look a bit more into the public procurement framework, which already allows for the use of non-price criteria, but it is true that there is a need to clarify what this means and how to implement this in a way that actually helps us drive the lead market creation. And especially because it is estimated that the potential of public procurement to create lead markets for cement is about 31% of the size of the actual cement market. So it is definitely a non-negligible size, and it can help us reduce this green premium that Rob was talking about as well, especially at the beginning where we have to de-risk these investments. Another thing that perhaps it's quite important from procurement side is its strategic importance. Of course, this is made clear by the Clean Industrial Deal. And I would like to focus on how moving beyond awarding contracts based on price only is actually crucial to enable this lead market creation. At the moment, the system is failing to internalize the costs of externalities, maybe due to climate issues, adaptation in the future, mitigation. It is also true that there are costs that perhaps are not reflected but only by the price. So if we're going to introduce sustainability criteria, we need to reflect the true life cycle costs and performances of these products. I would also maybe like to mention that I think the way I see it is that with public procurement, it helps us set the bar so that the private sector can swiftly follow it. And then I do see that the extending the environmental criteria to private procurement indeed can drive broader demand, and it will be necessary. And I do think that the labels, as they are mentioned in the Clean Industrial Deal, will help us do this in a systemic way that doesn't require a different label for every different procurement procedure. And again, I think at the moment, but the criteria, using criteria beyond price, it's voluntary. But it is good to consider what would it look if we had mandatory criteria, which is, I think, essential to send consistent demand signals. This would also help us reduce market fragmentation and regulatory uncertainty, creating a guaranteed demand for this low carbon cement. And it can also bring clarity and simplicity when we know how to, when procurement authorities know how to do this in a systemic way. And to the part of implementation into the EU and national level, I think both have a role to play. Of course, that the EU, we can set harmonized, clear rules and minimum thresholds for low carbon cement. We can ensure cohesion and scale that is very needed to develop the market, especially as we have products that are very much used across the EU. And at the national local level, there it's a possibility to apply these sector-specific strategies that account for the national context, because of course not all national member states have the same industries and the same decarbonization pathways that they're choosing. So we also need to tailor it to implement infrastructure priorities. And I think I will leave it there.
Thank you, René. Very clear also. So now interested to see, to hear the opinion and the views of builders. Stefanos, I give you the floor. Perfect.
Good morning and thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the European construction industry. We are, as mentioned, the voice of the contractors, representing 32 member federations from 27 European countries, including 24 EU member states. We are also the officially recognized social partner, representing employers in social dialogue. I would like to point out that our members range from very small one-person sole traders to SMEs and large international firms. So we have variety in who we speak for. Now, directly to the question. Carbon neutrality by 2050 requires carbon capture and carbon dioxide transport storage infrastructure, although we do believe that current ambition levels are a little bit overly ambitious because we need to look into the socioeconomic constraints, especially regarding housing shortages and employment pressures. While procurement rules and especially public procurement rules significantly affect our sector, the introduction of mandatory non-price criteria for the environment and for circularity could be a powerful lever to push demand for low carbon materials in construction and create the much needed demand. We need to buy materials with the lowest carbon footprint at the most competitive price. However, we are often faced with conflicting specifications. And here I'm referring to technical versus environmental. There may be a technically better product, which hasn't caught up environmentally, and this needs to be addressed when drafting specifications for public procurement, so that we are not stuck with, well, which side do we go on, the technical or the environmental? Further, we face overburden from regulatory compliance, which risks failure of meeting many of our objectives, especially for SMEs. And in our sector, as I mentioned earlier, much of the work is actually done by SMEs. Many of these then have reporting requirements to bigger corporations, which are covered by compliance regulations. At this point, I'd like to thank Irene for her mention, and we agree that consistency in assessment is paramount. One size may not fit all, and flexibility is required to allow for a more outcomes-driven approach. What we would not like to see is different methodologies for assessing different types of materials that we use. This will just create a bureaucratic nightmare. Moving on to the issue of the price gap, we believe that continued assessment and reaction is required. We are concerned that we must ensure that the party which should pay the environmental cost actually does, and that this is not transferred cleverly across borders or into non-member territories where more relaxed regulations allows for this. This could be done through a measure of This could be done through financial measures, incentives, disincentives, and we also need to correctly assess and allocate risks to the party most capable of dealing with them. Yes. Now, just to briefly touch on a few examples, as said earlier, the construction sector is responsible for 33% of global emissions. However, only 1/5 of these come from the actual construction process. The majority being linked to the production of materials and products applied on the construction site for building structures. We have recently had some positive communication regarding something similar for steel. And this is, I think they're pretty much at the same level now, developing their own protocols and labels, and it would be good. However, we also need to address the issue of skills. We are facing a skill shortage in this field and would like to see some investment in training and upskilling. Finally, I would like to remind everyone that technologically neutral solutions usually give space for creativity and innovation, and I'd like to see a lot more of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefanos. Also really clear position and statement. Before going to the second question, I would like to remind our audience that they can ask questions on the Q&A button from the Zoom, because so far we haven't got any, and I think that you've got lots of interesting statements that I came during the discussion, so please don't hesitate and don't be shy. For the second question, here is the second question. So low carbon definitions play a key role in lead markets development. CEMBUREAU has a framework definition of low carbon cements, and the Clean Industrial Deal announces the creation of a label for cement under the CPR. Do you see labels as mandatory or voluntary? And should they be developed at EU level or by member states, considering subsidiarity and local specificities? Barbara, the floor is yours for a question that is really key because you were the one making those statements, at least the Commission. So really interested to hear your views.
Yeah, thank you. So we already said how important lead markets are as a signal to boost demand in innovative and decarbonized products. Now what is needed, and some of you hinted at that, is obviously common methodology and common references and benchmarks. This is why for us it is so key to have standards in place for cement and low carbon cement under the construction product regulation. This will provide the harmonization which is needed in terms of the methodology, in terms of the overall assessment of CO2 emissions, and will also stimulate the demand for innovative products. So we are currently really in the critical phase for the standardization of low carbon cement, because we have a draft standardization request out for a vote by the member states. So we hope that the process will be smooth, and then we hope that we will have the standard in time in the standardization request. We are setting out 2027 as the delivery date. Actually, we are also discussing with the Sensenelec whether we could include the standard for cement as in the pilot that we are developing for fast tracking standardization request, standardization deliverables. So indeed, low carbon cement will be, or is one of the candidates that we are currently discussing in order to be a pilot for this fast tracking. So hopefully even faster than what we have put in the standardization request. As I said, this will be key because under the construction product regulation, then we will have a mandatory declaration of performance and declaration of performance and conformity, referring to the CO2 emissions of cement, and there will be also a label on the packaging. So basically, we will have a mandatory label under the construction product regulation, which will give a signal with respect to the CO2 emissions of the cement. We believe this is fundamental. That then can be the basis for further voluntary labeling by the member states, who may want to define the threshold for what is a green or low carbon cement, but on the basis of a common methodology. Also, well, we hope that we will proceed there in steps, but we hope that the standardization or the standard will cover as many as possible new cement, including very innovative ones. That may take a while, but this is definitely our objective. I just wanted to maybe react to some of the issues that were raised. Obviously, I mean, it's not only a question of low carbon cement or low carbon construction materials, but this is important. But it's a combination of low carbon materials, low carbon production processes, and this is where the Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act will intervene, as well, obviously, then the implementation of the European of the Energy Performance of Building Directive. So we will have we will cover all the elements. Then, in order to support a competitive and decarbonized construction sector, our idea would be to come with a strategy on housing construction next year in the context of the affordable housing plan. And there we will be looking at different pillars, and circularity will be one of those pillars, lead markets, access to finance, but also access to skills, which I think was mentioned by Stefanos, and permitting. So I just a call to your stakeholder community also to give us feedback on that and input on that. I think Stefanos mentioned the overburden for SMEs. There again, you know that this commission is very much focused on simplifying the current regulatory framework. We have already adopted many proposals which go in that direction. But if from the construction sector there's any particular identification of regulatory bottlenecks that need to be addressed, we'll be very, very happy to hear from you. So now just coming back to the main question, lead markets, please do help us in the standardization process. We need to get it right, and we need to get it fast.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Clear also statement and request to all the stakeholders. Rob, do you want to react and provide your answer to the question?
Yeah, I will try. So what we see is, as indicated also to Barbara, and I mentioned that before, that we will have labeling of the cements with global warming potential value. And that makes sense. That is one of the key parameters, but it's not the only performance indicator of cement. And I think that development, and also in the standardization request that Barbara mentioned, it is important that we move into that direction. On the other hand, we have to be clear, and I stated that before, we have to look at the built environment. Barbara mentioned, in fact, two elements of the low carbon issue for the construction, that is low carbon materials and low carbon production. But it's not only low carbon construction and materials, it's also about how do you implement that in the construction, and what type of construction will you have? What type of insulation, what type of walls, what type of, all that have an influence on the overall performance of a building. Keep in mind, Stefanos mentioned that 20% of the say, global climate change impact of the built environment, of housing, in fact, what he said, is coming on from the construction materials. The rest, so 80%, is in fact all other climate change impact values that have an influence, heating, cooling, all that. I think that brings me to the point what we have to keep in mind. We need a system for a voluntary system for countries to have a national labeling scheme based on a framework that is identical. So we need a systematic approach, perhaps on international level, but certainly on European level, not necessarily with the same values, because the differences in the countries are huge. So the difference, the possibilities for decarbonisation in the countries are different. They have all to go into low carbon net zero cement in 2050, but the trajectories will be different in each country. And that means also that the values that we have, the labeling system that we could have, will be different. And that has to be taken into account. But what we have developed together with the Global Cement and Concrete Association is and I have to say, based on work done by the International Energy Agency and also by UNIDO, we have developed together a sort of labeling system for cement, for green cement and for less green cement. That can be implemented on national level. And the good news is that Manuel Mohr of the German Cement Association will give an example later in this seminar. And that's good. So that is an issue that we could do. Not perhaps all countries, because some countries have other systems already in place, fine. But at least for the countries that have nothing, we could have a voluntary system for labeling of cement. I think that is also important to keep in mind that these labeling systems and the cement could be used in public procurement. So a public procurer or also private procurer, a private actor could look at what type of cement, what type of concrete, because that is the end product, is to be used for the purpose of the construction. So back to what I think what is important to keep in mind is that we have mandatory things to be done from especially the CPR, which is good. And we have to have voluntary actions on member state level to trigger first public demand, because that is the sector that has to move on this for sure. And when they move, I expect also that the private sector will come into action. But the public sector has to move first. For that, the public procurement is important. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Also really clear. So now I would like to have your views, Irene, on that.
Yes, thank you, Jean-Baptiste. Yeah, perhaps I would like to react to what Rob mentioned about the national level schemes with different values, which I would perhaps like to challenge a little bit this notion, especially because we have clear targets at European level, and the targets are 55% reduction by 2030, net zero by 2050. So even though indeed the countries are starting from different starting points, we all need to get to the same place. So of course, there is no other way than to go but being ambitious in these values. And while I agree that the measures might need to look different, I wouldn't perhaps advocate for different values in this aspect. And I would also maybe like to issue a word of caution about the voluntary system, because that's what we have at the moment with public procurement framework, is a voluntary approach to procuring the most economically advantageous tender, which is not hasn't been uptaken at the necessary level to drive the lead market creation. So I do think that going for this mandatory approach in the criteria, it's so important. And I know I'm repeating myself a little bit, but just want to stress that point. And perhaps to answer the proper question, is that it is a very complex issue. And I think both Barbara and Rob showed the nature of the issue really well, that we have emission reduction possible at multiple levels across the cement value chain, We can do clinker reduction at clinker level, cement level, concrete level, infrastructure level, and even a built environment as a whole level. So, and this is also paired with a whole wide range of decarbonisation levers, such as reducing the clinker to cement ratio, increasing the use of supplementary cementitious materials, using carbon capture and storage for residual emissions, material efficiency, and even sufficiency in the built environment. And again, multiple levers, not all of which have the same CO2 performance. And how do we make sure that the labels that we use are actually targeting these at the most systemic level possible, so that we actually have the largest emission reduction. So again, very big size of the problem, and of course, standards will be crucial, and getting them right, especially to include for all of these measures. The labels will need to be very robust, of course, based on life cycle accounting methodologies, setting ambitious and credible thresholds that will go beyond an emissions rating system, and that actually incentivize real decarbonisation, while also keeping it clear and simple, because they should be easy to implement and to understand. So a lot of things to consider, but I do think that it is very important that we set to this task at both EU level and member state level. In this aspect, I don't have like a who should set the label answer, let's say. I do have some pros and cons for both, so perhaps I'll list them and we can discuss on this. I think at EU level, the biggest pro is that we ensure coherence across the single market and ensuring ambition and consistency, and preventing also fragmentation. And indeed, the cons is that we need to see how we enable the let's say member states to actually adapt to their national context in a way that makes sense for the whole union. And then at the member state level, then okay, we target this as issue of flexibility at local level, but we have a risk of creating a non-reforming system, and it could allow less ambitious countries to lag behind, which in the end is a no-win for anyone. So perhaps the EU could set a baseline, a strong harmonized methodology with minimum thresholds, and member states can go beyond this threshold if they wish to do so. And that also we ensure alignment between these labels and the procurement criteria to maintain the clarity. And I would leave it at that.
Also clear. That's good to discuss on those issues, and that's always nice. So thank you for providing your vision. Manuel, we are not that late, but we've got first Stefanos for 4 minutes, and then you can take over to present the German system. So I'm happy that we're not that late. So Stefanos, I give you the floor.
Thank you. I would just like to react to a couple of points said and then proceed. First, I'd like to clarify that when referring to the 80-20, the 20% refers to the actual carbon created by the construction activities. The other 80% is embedded in the materials and, of course, the operation of the building. Also, I would like to thank Irene for some of her points she made. There is alignment in the process-based approach, and there are definitely pros and cons with both. And we need further discussion and assessment before reaching any final conclusions. Following on, I need to state that FIEC hasn't yet reached the final position, as this topic is still in the stage of internal discussion. But I will provide some insights, as we believe exchanges like this one are especially helpful to guide us through the process. Labels are a powerful, informative and enabling tool. However, as this process is still in its infancy, we need to be careful in order to avoid unnecessarily shocking the market. We also need to consider elements like longevity of products, especially in terms of construction, where whole life cycle carbon impact is important. If we can spread an initial impact over a longer period, there is definitely advantages. Neutrality regarding construction materials is critical for innovation, as I had previously mentioned. And in the built environment, we are open to use cement or any other materials containing good substitutes for clinker or other materials, components. Although cement is a major industrial emitter, it also happens to be very important as a binder for concrete and is actually the most widely used construction material. So even small changes could have huge impact on the industry. Albeit 60% of the emissions come from the chemical process in calcining limestone, which is intrinsic to cement production. This can only be avoided using carbon capture and storage technology, which is definitely an area of focus we believe should receive attention and funding. There are alternatives for such binders, which could be a potential solution. And as mentioned earlier, we would gladly consider their use, provided the technical specification of the product meets our clients' requirements. I would also like to put some food for thought. One such area would be whether it would be prudent to reserve budgets dedicated for research and support for the uptake of such materials, especially in the post-2027 multi-annual financial framework, as a means to meet objectives and push innovation in the sector. The second one, and this is following on from comments by Irene and Rob earlier, I just need to restate the need for an outcomes-driven approach. And given the mention of the EPBD, the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions approach, as integrated in this directive, and the new CPR, they do provide a holistic approach to reducing carbon footprint in construction, and this is a tool that should be utilized. Just to close on this topic, labels are necessary to give the information. How we choose to use them in the future is something that requires further discussion and interaction. But at this stage, we believe that we all need to keep an open mind and try to do as detailed assessment as possible about the pros and cons in order to come with the best solution possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefanos. And you were just 5 minutes late, so that was perfect. We almost took back time. So thank you also for the audience for sending the questions. Now they're arriving, so perfect. We'll try to answer them and discuss them after the presentation of Manuel. So Manuel, also the floor is yours. I think that everybody will be interested to see the example of Germany. Up to you.
Thanks, Jean-Baptiste, and good morning, everyone. I hope you can see the screen and also hear me properly. Excellent. So first of all, thanks for having me. And it's a pleasure to present where we stand in terms of the development of lead markets in Germany, and especially introducing the cement carbon class label to you. I will do this in around 5 to 10 minutes. So this will be really short, and I think I can build on a lot of statements that have been made by the panelists. So thanks a lot for this as well. Let me first of all start with the label itself. It's called CCC, Cement Carbon Class, and it's a label that, of course, builds on the work that has been developed at the international level, and I'll get to that in a moment. We've introduced the label in January. It's open for certification since April, and we're optimistic to have the first cements certified by summer. I'd like to stress that this label was developed based on a process with the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. So this is also very much endorsed by the process that we had with the ministry. And of course, the objective of the label is to increase transparency of low carbon cement, to ensure comparability. And so it's really about having consistent methodologies, as has been mentioned in the panel discussion. Before I go into the label itself and the classes, but let me say a few words about how we got there and what the background is. So actually, it all started with our German decarbonization roadmap, and also, of course, with the CEMBUREAU roadmap in 2020, when we identified the development of lead markets as one key field of action. If we want to really have a successful decarbonization, it's really about the question of how we manage to create demand for low carbon products. And then we had, let's say, a very positive development at the international level with the German G7 presidency in 2022. And the study by the International Energy Agency that you can see here on the left side of the slide, Achieving Net Zero Heavy Industry Sectors in G7 Members. There, the IEA suggested a methodology for the definition of low carbon cement, and I will get to that in a moment. Based on that development at the G7 level, in the same year, the Industrial Deep Decarbonization Initiative was launched, which was an initiative where a number of governments joined forces with the goal to incentivize low emission steel and cement production, and also the use of these low emission products. And as part of that, 4 governments, including Germany, were part and signed a green public procurement pledge in 2023, really outlining and committing themselves to procuring low carbon product increasingly over time. And based on that work that has been going on since 2020 and 2022 with the IEA concept, we developed a definition for low carbon cement in Germany. CEMBUREAU has developed the framework for low carbon cement, and also the GCCA, the Global Cement and Concrete Association, has developed a rating system for cement and concrete. So what I'd like to emphasize here is really that it all goes back to the work that has been done in the previous years. And I think this is also something we have to bear in mind when we go forward. So what did the IEA study suggest in terms of low carbon cement definition? I won't go into the details, but this chart, I think, perfectly illustrates the approach that was suggested. You see on the y-axis, the CO2 intensity per ton of cement in kilogram, and on the horizontal axis, the clinker factor, so the clinker content in cement. And what the IEA suggested was to have, let's say, 6 bands, 6 thresholds for low carbon and near zero cements, always in relation to the clinker content in cement. And we believed that this was a good starting point, but we also realized that the concept as it was proposed doesn't reward the use of clinker efficient cements, because the lower your clinker content, the lower the threshold is, which means effectively that when you have a cement, let's say in the class E, and you lower the cement content, you will not move to the D class and improve in terms of the class, but you rather slide down the curve and remain in class E. So we realized, and we also got support for this approach by the German government, that we have to use a static clinker to cement ratio in order to incentivize the reduction of the clinker content in cement, so that there is actually a reward by the definition for reducing the carbon footprint by using this decarbonization lever. And so we agreed in a stakeholder process with the German government that we would base our definition in Germany on this IEA concept, but we would, let's say, modify it in a way that we use a static to clinker to cement ratio based on 0.7 factor that we had on average in 2021 in Germany, in 22, and also which was the global average, by the way. So the definition that we now implement in Germany really goes back to that concept. And based on this, we, together with the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs in Germany, then developed this definition of low emission and near zero cement. And the ministry itself published a concept which is called Lead Markets for Climate Friendly Basic Materials, where it set out definitions for low emission steel, low emission cement, and also low emission chemicals. So what you see here is essentially in the green shaded areas of the graph, the levels D to A. starting with 500 kilograms CO2 per ton. This is really the starting point for a low emission cement in Germany now. And then you have steps of 100 kilogram moving to the next CO2 class. So cements below 400 kilogram would be C cements, below 300 B cements, and so on. And cements who would even reach a CO2 intensity below 100 kilogram would qualify as near zero according to that approach. And in the concept that was published, we as VDZ were mandated basically to develop a voluntary label to, let's say, implement this definition. And that's what we actually did in the, let's say, past year. So we asked ourselves, how can we best implement this by using existing and established methodologies such as environmental product declarations that you all know, and also by using data that is already available in order to not create additional reporting requirements and regulatory complexity also for cement producers. And hence we decided to use the EPDs as the basis for classifying cement, so the global warming potential that is indicated there, which can be externally verified EPDs or self-declarations based on verified EPD tools, for example. And as you may know that EPDs are valid for 5 years, we said we would, in addition to this, check the plausibility of the input data on an annual basis. So what we actually do in the certification for the CCC label is that we check on an annual basis all relevant input factors that influence the CO2 intensity of the cement. And based on that plausibility check, we are then able to classify the cements in the classes A to D or near zero, and then award the CCC label. But to be clear about that, the classification will always be based on the global warming potential in the EPD, because we want to avoid confusion by, let's say, publishing different CO2 values for cement. So we will plausibilize the GVP value of the EPD on an annual basis. And how do we do this? We do this by essentially analyzing and assessing 4 key parameters that you see in the gray box below. First, it's the cement composition in the previous year. This data is available based on the results of the external monitoring of the cements. Second is the CO2 intensity of the clinker. There we refer to the annual verified emission reports by the clinker producing installations, of course, and the electrical energy demand we can analyze based on data from the energy management system, and also the allocation of CO2 for supplementary cementitious materials is also reflected in the analysis. So based on that analysis that a cement producer has to provide the data to us, let's say the background report to the EPD, and also the data that I've just mentioned based on the previous year production, will then lead to a classification in the classes. So for cements with a global warming potential between 400 and 500, as I said in the beginning, we would then classify this cement as a D, level D cement or class D cement, and so on and so forth. And of course, the question arises how this relates to concrete. And there we made sure in the development of the label that this corresponds to the Concrete Sustainability Council classes for concrete. So a level D cement would then correspond to a level 1 concrete in the CSC, and a class C cement, for example, to a level 2 cement in the CSC, concept, which is important as the CSC certification is already well established in the German concrete and construction market. So coming to my last slide, the overall objective is, of course, to make low emission and near zero cement the standard. How do we get there? We believe that labels can play an important role here, as they can also adjust to rising emission levels and implementation of new technologies, of course. So what we really ask from let's say also policymakers in Germany is really to integrate and reflect the CO2 footprint in tendering and awarding processes, also on a mandatory basis. I think this is important to make sure that this is reflected. And so it is conceivable that you start with and refer to CO2 classes, for example, based on the CCC label, saying that cements with at least a level D should be used, for example, and then you can increase the ambition level of the lead market over time by the use of more technologies. Yeah, and of course, the labels have a number of benefits. I think I don't have to go through all of them. For us, I think it's really important to increase the visibility in the market for private and public procurement. On the one hand, we believe that the CO2 classes can be a good reference for procurement. Of course, we will ensure with the CCC label that this also complies with the future CPR requirements. So once you have the label, you also comply with the new requirements for the GVP disclosure for cements. And of course, we can also see increasingly ambitious procurement targets over time, for example, with the implementation of CCUS. Just closing with maybe one statement, I think it's really important to, on the one hand, make sure that there's a consistent methodology on the one hand to build on the work that's already been done, the EPDs, also the IEA concept and the things that we already have in order to avoid confusion and additional concepts with differing system boundaries, and at the same time allow member states to have flexibility in the implementation of labeling systems. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you so much, Manuel. Also really interesting and really clear. I think that's a good example of what can be done and what should be done by member states. Well, we're a little late, but not that late. So I will go through some of the questions. I've seen that Rob has been really busy answering already some of them. So you can find already some answers in there. Looking at the first question, so from Tudor, I think from ECOS, if we look at project level requirements, historically the focus was mainly on the operational emissions. So carbon intensive materials can always be offset by other operational components. Also, we have the energy sector overall trying to reduce emissions, which in itself would reduce operational emissions. That it takes an example. For example, in Germany, the flexibility of the BNB scoring mechanism allow key environmental requirements for products, such as the reuse of materials or the application of the waste hierarchy. As a result, the system often falls short of fully exploiting the potential for circular construction. Maybe that's a question for Rob or for Manuel. Notwithstanding the technology neutral approach at project level, how can we ensure a lead market for these strategic materials if we don't address them directly through product level requirements as well? Rob, Manuel, do you want to?
Now, the question on Germany should be for Manuel, of course. I'm not sure that Manuel sees it.
Do you see the question, Manuel?
Wait, let me check. It was on the BNB, right? I missed the
No,
first
question and answers. Yeah.
Yeah. It was in the Q&A. I'm just going to send it to you.
Let me read it and see if I'm able to answer. Give me a moment. Maybe you take another question first.
I'll take another question. Maybe a question for Barbara. Maybe if it's technical about the new CPR. Is there any news about the software to use as a tool to calculate global warming potential in a common way, which should be provided by the Commission?
Yeah, thank you. So just to be clear, we will not deliver the software as such, but we will develop supporting tools.
Good. Okay. Clear. Sorry, I'm noting because it's interesting. Okay.
Jean-Marc, I can try to give a very short. I think I cannot fully answer the question because it's a very broad one, but on the German BNB system, which is really for public procurement, there's a revision now going on at the moment where, of course, also not only the operational emissions, but also the embedded CO2 should be more reflected in the future. And we're also in touch with the Federal Ministry here of Building and Construction on whether and how the CO2 intensity or efficiency of cement and concrete can be better reflected in the overall systematic, so to speak. But this is really let's say, a construction-based approach to carbon accounting and not a product-based one. So it's really the question of how you integrate certain thresholds or ambition levels into this project-based CO2 accounting.
Thank you so much. A question from Benedict Fischer. When comparing labeling of green cement and all-life carbon assessment in the EPBD and the construction products regulation, what are the pros and cons of both? And what can labels for low-carbon cement provide that is not already addressed by the requirement to reduce carbon footprint of buildings? Rob, this one is for you, I think.
What I mentioned already before is labeling only of cement doesn't help much. You have to look at the built environment, and you have to look also at the construction materials, and cement is only a component of concrete. It is, from a climate perspective, the most important component, but nevertheless, it's only one. So just having a labeling for cement doesn't help. It is needed for public procurement because it gives a trigger for what products you should buy, but you always should assess it in the total perspective of the built environment. And that is important to keep that in mind. So now to say, do I answer this question? No, not really. What is really needed from public procurement perspective, when you focus on cement, you need that labeling system. I think that is needed. On the other hand, we have, and that is one of the other questions, we have the global warming potential to be put on the cement bags and in the cement information of the cement industry, so that the comparability of products is possible. And I think that's one important step that has to be made anyhow. So it is a portfolio of measures that we have to have. It's not simply only this or only that, and it is not just having, that's the complexity, in fact, of this whole discussion. It is not a simple answer, oh, we do one and then the rest we can forget. We have to do 1, 2, 3, and perhaps even 4. That's the challenge that I see.
Thanks, Rob. Stefano,
maybe on that, if I may complement, indeed, EPBD and CPR should work together, and there are many synergies. The advantage of having then the information on the CO2 emission of the cement under CPR would be to provide a boost to low carbon cement. But obviously, this is not the only factor, and then you have to look at the overall emission of the building under the performance of building directive.
Thank you, Barbara. Also really clear. I've got a question maybe for Stefanos from Agnès Petit. Considering that achieving net zero in the cement industry involves not only improving production processes, but also managing demand, how can major industry players proactively support initiatives aimed at reducing concrete consumption while simultaneously enhancing the value for the company and society?
Thank you. Well, it's a two-part question. I will start with the reducing concrete consumption. This can only realistically be achieved by more efficient design. As engineering design tools improve and knowledge improves, we can design our buildings more efficiently. Additionally, we can strategically use secondary materials for part of the process, but here it comes with a big caveat, and this may partially answer a previous question. We often neglect transport and other impacts created by secondary materials because there is no uniformity in the embedded carbon impact from secondary materials in different regions, so they're not all the same. And going back to the managing demand element, here, if the right ingredients exist in the market, and I refer to incentives, disincentives for being more green or being more circular, then the market will self-regulate and companies will prefer to use these materials. If, on the other hand, they see an overburden by compliance and box ticking to prove that these materials are compliant, then they may often choose the easiest route. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, thank you all for your questions, but I think we need to close the event because we're a little bit over. So thank you all the panelists, Barbara, Irene, Stefanos, Rob, Manuel, for your participation and your insights. Really, really appreciated. It's only the start of the conversation until the end of the year. So interesting and challenging, but we will see. And I give the floor back to Cliona, and also thank you for the attendance, for listening to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean-Baptiste. Yeah, I can only reiterate what you said. Thank you to all the speakers for the really interesting presentations, and thank you to all the excellent questions from the audience. It was great to see such a high level of engagement. And I think it was very interesting also to see the German example explained to us. So thank you, Manuel, for that. Just to flag that CEMBUREAU is currently working on a position paper on this topic. We're finalizing it and it will be published in the coming weeks. And of course, we will be happy to share a copy with you all. So please do watch out for that in your inbox over the next few weeks. And thanks again to the Commission for allowing this to be part of EU Green Week. It's been a pleasure being with you all this morning, and thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our future events. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Have a good afternoon.